Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, April 17th, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at a best case scenario map in the United States Senate elections in 2026 for the Democratic Party in the next midterm election. The reason why I want to do this is because we've seen a lot of headlines recently. If you're scrolling through Politico or you just follow a bunch of DC journalists who cover races like those pertaining to the United States Senate, as Democrats are now eyeing a challenge to Susan Collins in the state of Maine, as well as Maggie Goodlander, the freshman representative from the state of New Hampshire, who announced today, just about 30 minutes ago, that she's not going to be running for Senate against Chris Pappas, the other Democratic representative from the state of New Hampshire, paving a clear pathway forward for a New England strategy for a newly elected Democrat in both New Hampshire and Maine. And so I thought it would be fitting to take a look at just where we are in the national landscape. We've been doing a lot of prediction videos for the Senate elections, but none that explore external possibilities of Democrats or Republicans in uniquely strong positions that you might not necessarily expect, nor should we expect, in the upcoming election, but it is always interesting to take a look at. So in due time, I'll make one for the GOP. Arguably, this map is much more lopsided in favor of the Republican Party and limiting a Democratic majority come the next Congress as it's sworn in. But of course, we're still going to explore the possibilities in the Democratic Party's best case scenario. Now, before we kick off this map, I just want to acknowledge that we are going to work within this map within some level of realism, right? Which means I'm not going to be flipping states like Nebraska all of a sudden necessarily to the Democratic Party, but it doesn't mean that Nebraska, the poor example, honestly speaking, if we just go ahead and add one here, we can just go ahead and write independent, because there is actually a third-party candidate gearing up to run in Nebraska, which we actually might see something breakthrough pending, right, depending on what happens across the state. But the point is that this is going to work within a level of realistic expectation for both Democrats and Republicans, in that in a best case scenario map probably means Democrats are winning the national popular vote largely around where they did back in 2018, which was roughly 8 percentage points. Now that's monumental. It allowed Democrats to pick up 40 seats in the House of Representatives, and it also prevented them from losing a number of Senate races that they otherwise might have lost. So a lot of explaining, not a lot of map making. So let's go ahead and get into it and just start by characterizing the states that at baseline will be safe for the Democratic Party in this best case scenario. So this includes states like Oregon and Illinois, bringing back the states such as New Jersey that were closer in the last election. Massachusetts and Rhode Island would certainly need to share this characterization. And given this slate of candidates that are up in 2026, it also would require Democrats to make these advancements elsewhere. When you look back at the last time these Senate elections were up, you have to take a look. You had Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire, who won by 15 points. That was massive, right? In 2022, we remember that the Republican lost by roughly 10 points, 11 points across the state. So states like New Hampshire would have to revert back to being safe for the Democratic Party. Seems unlikely given that Harris only won the state by roughly 4 points. But again, Biden was only winning it by 7 points in the margin at which Jeanne Shaheen was running up the Senate map by roughly 15 points. So in a best case scenario, I really do think we can argue that 2022 was not a best case scenario, certainly for Democrats, yet Democrats somehow won by 11. In 2020, they won by 16. Best case, we're getting it over that 15 point. So New Hampshire is up there going to the Democratic Party. Virginia with Mark Warner is going to be quite interesting too. There was a lot of speculation earlier on that Mike Warner might not run. Here he is, 12 points margin in 2020, larger than that of Biden's. I don't know if it's going to be safe in the best case scenario, but he is running for re-election. And that's something the Democrats are quite thrilled to know because he's popular across the state. And although 2026 might have been an opportunity for somebody new, they know he can win. And they largely are fans of him in the state of Virginia. So Virginia, I would shield away. Minnesota, I'd throw back into a column at which Democrats could, largely say maybe not necessarily safe. Here's the thing, though. Tina Smith isn't running. The, popular lieutenant governor is running. I guess it's actually more reasonable for me to pull it out of the safe Democratic column. But for now, Minnesota, I definitely say, is teetering that edge of being an 11, 12, 13, 14-point state, given the right circumstances, as I would say about Virginia and some other states. Now, Colorado's definitely on that verge of becoming a much more, solid Democratic state in 2026. It went to, Hillary Clinton by 5, then to Biden by 14, then to Harris by 12. And so the shifts here really weren't matching the national average. And so Colorado, under a more Democratic circumstance, absolutely would be a safe Democratic state. New Mexico, again, I'm a bit worrisome for Democrats there, so I wouldn't characterize it as safe, but that brings Democrats to already a baseline of 42 seats that aren't up for re-election or safe seats that they have. Now, Republicans have their fair share of those states too. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, not Nebraska, and we'll talk about why not Nebraska. It used to be, not anymore. Kansas, there were certain instances in which Democrats could have had the right moment to meet that, Senate race. Doesn't look like it's going to happen in 2026, but anything's possible later down the line. Oklahoma's going to be safe. Arkansas is going to be safe. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, all going to be safe for the Democratic Party. South Carolina, probably too, for Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. So that brings us right now to about 45 seats in the United States Senate. I'd reasonably argue that, because Harris lost Florida by 13 points, that in a slightly better national environment for Democrats, or substantially better, given this is a best case scenario, Florida can't be a safe Republican state, given that it wasn't even safe in 2024. So I'd pull back from Florida. I'd pull away Texas. I'd also pull away Alaska. Again, in that hypothetical, these are all, by the way, going to be, substantively likely Republican states, which means they're going to win the states. But it is, worthy of talking about that they're not categorically safe Republican states from the get-go, which is good news for Democrats. But again, this is their best case scenario. So in operating under this, where do we go from here? Well, it starts by characterizing the likely Democratic states. States like New Mexico and Minnesota and not Maine. That's my force of habit coming off the presidential, and Virginia and Michigan, all states that Democrats should largely expect to win in 2026 rather, but are going to do so by margins that are beyond a lean characterization, anywhere from 1 to 5 points. And honestly speaking, these states in particular, we should probably expect Democrats to win by margins of roughly, 10 points plus, barring Michigan. Right? Michigan will be a little bit closer, but in a best case scenario, you're probably hovering somewhere around there, just like Democrats did in the gubernatorial race in both 2018 and 2022. The more nationalized races in Michigan tend to lean a bit bluer than they do on the presidential level as well. You can see that in 2024 explicitly when you have a Democrat win the Senate race on the same ballot that Kamala Harris is losing the state by 2 points. Clearly, there was crossover support for Elisa Slotkin. Clearly, there were voters out there that decided that they were just voting for Trump and not voting for anything down ballot, which leans into the problem that Republicans have, which is, depreciating turnout when Donald Trump isn't on the ballot and it isn't a mainstream election and not as many people know about it. Republicans have become the party increasingly more reliant on these low propensity voters, and Democrats the opposite way, which explains why Democrats are, doing well in Michigan in this scenario. So Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, Virginia, all likely Democratic states. Now, Republicans have their fair share of those too. Those are states like Florida, where we're going to see Rick Scott run for re-election, and it's going to be, not Rick Scott, the Attorney General, now Moody is her name, running for Senate in 2026. Let me go ahead and see if I can just pull up a map here, because I think that'd be a bit easier. I don't know why I was in this expectation point for Rick Scott. I think it's because I remember he ran recently. But let's see. Ashley Moody running as Florida's Attorney General. There is still some possibility that Republicans decide that they're going to go ahead and put forth someone notable across the state, but chances are Ashley Moody is going to do well. It's a pretty substantive, solid Republican state, but again, the point of a best case scenario for Democrats is bringing that down to likely. I'd also argue, too, that in a best case scenario, Texas probably wouldn't be a likely red state either. Again, these are all hypotheticals, but looking back to the last presidential, yes, Trump won the state by 14 points, but we seem to forget too that, Trump won the state by 9 in 2016, and then 2 years later, Ted Cruz was winning by roughly 2 points, right? So that was a massive reduction, and I will say, Texas probably would teeter on the edge of being on the low likely margins, given that it is John Cornyn. But if it is Ken Paxton, which it becomes increasingly more likely that that's possible, the best case scenario for Democrats is bringing it back to where it was in 2018. And that's really the extent of it. It's not going to be blue. Democrats are not going to win Texas as of right now. And that's why I think in the best case, again, we are all operating under this best case scenario circumstance, Texas probably is lean red and not likely. So we'll skip over it now. Alaska is going to be a likely red state. I'd say, that's the best case scenario for Democrats there. I don't imagine, unless Mary Peltola decides to run, which it doesn't look like she wants to, it looks increasingly more likely that she either wants to run for House or run for governor, but not the United States Senate. I believe this is Dan Sullivan up in 26 as well. I don't think Democrats really have an easy opening to the Senate race in Alaska, but they can narrow it and they can make it closer. So it brings us down to 7 remaining toss-ups, arguably to Ohio, right? John Husted is a traditional, middle-of-the-road, standard conservative, not extreme, not MAGA, not associated with MAGA either, and he's going to do well. He's the appointed nominee here. He's going to win the race, and I think it's going to be by a larger margin than some of these other states. So it will be interesting too. The next state I'd take a look at is the state of Iowa. I think when looking at this state and largely speaking as to, what's going to happen here, Joni Ernst has already declared she's running for re-election. The Democrats really don't have that many strong people in the race. I'm not confident Democrats are going to narrow down Iowa either. I think, again, in the best case scenario, you're getting it to where it was in 2020, which was Teresa Greenfield, who lost to Joni Ernst by 6 points, which is what I think would happen. I don't think there will be any national investments from the Democratic Party. And two, even though it might be a state worth looking at, it's not necessarily a state that is within reach, given where it has voted over the past 3 elections. States like Texas, states like Florida, I'm honestly a bit more convinced that these are states, although given their rightward trajectory, are states the Democrats can look at and say, we might have had a chance before, so it might be worthwhile trying to keep up the party infrastructure. In Iowa, there hasn't been a shot since Obama has been president, and I don't think Democrats really realized that until the 2022 elections when they got completely blown out. Even very long-term incumbents and people who had been serving in largely nonpartisan positions were also blown out too. Florida, again, I don't think Democrats should invest in, but I think they deserve a share characterization. So Florida, Iowa, Ohio, Alaska, likely for the Republican Party. Now, in this best-case scenario for Democrats, they are winning in states like Maine, and they are winning in states like North Carolina, and they are winning in states like Georgia. They are getting the 3 states that currently have Republican incumbents and not losing any of the states they currently have, which puts them closer to victory in the next election cycle. North Carolina would have Roy Cooper in this case. John Ossoff would be up against Brian Kemp or somebody else in Georgia. And again, this is all humoring it under a best-case scenario for Democrats that the right things happen at the right time and the perfect storm combination happens all across the country, because it might not look like this come November. And Maine would also give Democrats the opportunity for the first time since 2020 to seriously contest Susan Collins as an incumbent. But what you might notice out of the 3 states I've characterized is that these states are also swing states from the 2020 election. But you know what weren't? Texas and Nebraska. 2 states that I think at the end of the evening, come November of 2026, Republicans will win the states. But I don't think by the margins we expect. There's an independent candidate, Dan Osborne. I don't know if you remember him. Well, he ran for Senate back in 2024, and that result was fascinating. Dan Osborne, as an independent, Republicans went up against him because Democrats didn't field a candidate on purpose to back Dan Osborne, although he wasn't committed to, really caucusing with anybody in the United States Senate. Dan Osborne, as this nonpartisan independent, lost by 6 points. 6 points when Donald Trump was demolishing Kamala Harris in the state by 21%. Meaning if this was a state that was decided by a margin of, let's say, 15 or less by math, Dan Osborne might be a United States Senator today. Well, guess what? He's back, actively floating with the idea that he will run in the state of Nebraska. And if he does, the race will actually be a lot closer than people expect. Osborne is a force to be reckoned with because he knows how to win over a lot of Trump voters. And if the national environment is so conducive, I think he brings the margin down to 2 or 3 points. I still think Pete Ricketts, given his history as governor, wins the state. But he brings it down to 2 or 3 points. In Texas, if Allred decides to run again, which I don't think, everybody was saying that he is the person who's going to win this race, but I think it's about keeping the margins competitive. And arguably, Colin Allred outran Kamala Harris by 5 to 6 points in the last election, which makes him that much more enticing for Democrats to run, because it isn't that they think they can beat John Cornyn. It's that they think with Ken Paxton, the attorney general who was impeached by the Texas delegation, who survived his trial in the Senate, who has been accused of corruption upon corruption, accused of very, very bad things in his office as attorney general, is running for Senate, likely going to win the Republican primary, but not likely to win over all that many swing voters. And so combining the perfect storm, again, still Republicans win this, don't get it wrong, but it makes it a little bit closer. And it brings the Republicans to 51, down from 53. And the Democrats flip North Carolina, they flip Georgia, They flip Maine, too. Or not flip Georgia. They keep Georgia. They keep Michigan and Minnesota and Virginia and New Mexico. And all the states that Republicans would also be investing in, too. Bringing Democrats that much closer to the Senate majority the next cycle. But they still don't get it this one because it's close, because it's a really difficult map, but ultimately a very interesting result. So 51-49. Keep your eye out on Nebraska and certainly look at Texas. And again, remember, this is a Democratic best case scenario. This is not the likeliest scenario from right now. But here's the thing. What I find to be the most interesting of it all is that we could very well see a Senate map like this come November 2026. And a big reason for that is because this map is so limiting, it limits in both directions. Democrats largely have a bar that they need to clear in order to say the midterms were a success. That bar is likely right around the area that you see the highest result in. Now, the margins might look different come November. Democrats might win North Carolina with Roy Cooper. They might lose North Carolina with Roy Cooper. They might win Maine with Jared Golden. They might lose Maine with Jared Golden. They might win Georgia with Jon Ossoff. They might lose Georgia with Jon Ossoff. But if Democrats were to get a map like this, Texas might be a little bit more red, and Nebraska might be a little bit more skewed in favor of the independent. Who knows? A lot can change between now and November of 2026. But as of now, this is where I put the map for Democrats in their best case scenario, 51 for Republicans, 49 for Democrats. Democrats flip 2 seats, Republicans flip none. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and watch. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.